Hello and welcome to Switzer TV Property. I'm Peter Switzer, and this is the show where we try to make you an expert on property, and we do that by seeking out the experts who can make you exactly that. On tonight's show, we're going to explore the rebound with house prices, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne. We'll do that with the founder of Property Empire, Chris Gray, who used to be the host on Sky Business's Your Property Empire. And then we'll talk to nationally respected valuer Greville Paps from WBP Group. And we then catch up with the host of that great television program, Grand Designs Australia, Peter Madison, to get to know the man in front of the camera. That's the show. Let's get on with the show. My first guest is Chris Gray, the founder of Your Empire and the former host of Your Property Empire on the Sky Business channel. Chris, great to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
Look, I want to talk to you about the rebound in the housing market, but just quickly explain what your business is in the property sector.
Sure, and I like the term rebound rather than correction, but we can get into that later on.
Okay.
So effectively, I've got a property buyer's agents business. I was an accountant by trade, basically semi-retired out of Deloitte at 31 because I was making so much money from property and tried to salary sacrifice a Ferrari, and they worked out the FBT was more than my wages. They knew I was doing something different. Yeah. So then people said, oh, how do you do it? So I started teaching them, and then they just said, look, do it for me. So effectively, we build property portfolios for people and then buy their homes and investments, but generally from a financial perspective rather than from an emotional one.
Yeah, okay. So therefore, you having an intimate understanding of the various markets around Australia are fairly important to you, because I guess if markets are getting a real clobbering, it's also a buying opportunity for someone like you as well.
Sure. So most of the time I specialise in one thing, as in blue chip. So whatever I do for me, I do for my clients. And so typically I'm buying second-hand, median price, capital city, 5 to 10 Ks from the city, because I reckon that is the most stable thing, just like you'd have blue chip shares. But yes, I do. I understand the regional markets and I understand the brand new markets. And it's more from avoiding it because I see all those volatility and the scary stories.
Okay. Houses and apartments, or just apartments?
So I'm a believer of buy where you're or buy something depending on where you're investing. So in Sydney, I'd always buy a unit because that's what the average person lives in for the average price. Melbourne, probably more a townhouse or a villa. Anywhere else in Australia, a house.
Okay, so you are across all kinds, but you select. Now let's go back to the point you're saying. For example, in Sydney, you go apartments. Why is that?
So typically I'm avoiding the CBD because there's no limit of supply. You can keep building massive towers and not many Aussies want to live in the city. Yeah. So if you go 5 to 15 Ks for the median price, which is roughly $1 million, that gets you a 2-bedroom unit in Coogee, Bondi, Kirribilli, Manly, Fairlight, Balmain, places like that. That's where all the young professionals with high disposable income, that's where they want to live. And so basic economics from your economics school is if there's no supply, lots of demand, no matter what's going on in the market, prices go up.
And are the people who live in these properties, are they tenants or are they owners as well?
So you get a balance of both. So in one of the blocks I own where I bought in 97, so 20 years ago when I first came to Australia, there's been a block of 9, only 2 have sold since then. And so when you've got that short of supply, because there's people that have been in there for 30 or 40 years, they pass it on to their kids. Yeah. When you've got zero supply, prices only go one way.
So in selecting an apartment in an outer area to the CBD, you look at from the point of view of how likely is a council going to permit a whole lot of apartments. Like for example, in Sydney, around Burwood and Stratford and Homebush, they've gone ballistic. But there are a lot of other suburbs where I presume the councils are very resistant. Is that the sort of place that you target because it maintains the value?
That's the thing. So if you're down at Coogee Beach, you can basically go 3 stories high. You move further out to Randwick or Kensington or something like that, and the further you go out, the more density they want. And so in one building in Coogee, we doubled it from 7 to 14, but that's almost unheard of. And so that's the thing. So even if council said you can build twice the levels, chances are people still aren't going to give up their properties.
Do you do development?
We do tiny bits of development. We call it more major renovations. So that block of 7 we turned into 14. We put 2 penthouses on the roof and a little block in the back garden. But it's really a bonus for buying right by the beach rather than the whole reason for it.
What about, I've noticed that some councils have permitted the top level of old apartment blocks to actually build into the roof. Is that something that you've done in the past and that's successfully added a lot of value to them?
Sure. So we've set up a small fund, probably literally only about 6 months ago, to invest in property options. So in some of the western suburbs in Sydney, like in Parramatta, they've potentially doubled the size of the CBD. And so that's where you could suddenly turn 50 apartments into 300, 400, 500 apartments. So there's plenty of opportunity there. But this is where our clients would invest maybe 1 or 2% of their money, but they'd put the 1995 into blue chip property.
Okay. I know historically you've told me you've bought apartments in Sydney, Melbourne, right around the country, and they're often exclusively great quality apartments. But there's a whole lot of worries around cladding issues and structural or building issues. Has that really taken away a bit of the demand for apartments in Sydney and Melbourne?
So just like we say there's two different property markets, there's houses and there's units, even when you get to units, there's different types of units. So if you've got a block of 500 units that's brand spanking new, that's completely different to a block of 9 by the beach. And so we're typically just investing in blocks of 12 or smaller, and we leave the bigger stuff to other people.
Okay.
But that is the major downside. So buying off the plan, you've got the risk of not being able to settle, which lots of people couldn't, especially the foreigners. And now we've got all these cladding issues. Whether the cladding issues is something new or it's something just brought around by the media because they can't talk about the property downturn anymore, they've got to talk about something. When the media gets hold of something, it's like a red rag to a bull, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And I guess in many ways, the problem around cladding, first up, they're going to really need the owners of these apartment blocks, the developers, are going to need someone to sign off and say, there is no cladding problem here. Therefore, buyers could go in confident that there's no cladding issue. The next sign off will be, will the building fall apart? It's a big problem, isn't it?
Well, effectively, it was being signed off, so it was private certifiers that were signing it off. So that's the issue. And so, look, this is something now, it's got so big in the media that the government will have to sort something out. But it's like anything. There's various different schemes over the years to take your builders to court, whether you're doing something in your back garden or you're doing a massive block. And you try and sue anyone for anything, and the lawyers win, and it's a whole
claim
nightmare.
bankruptcy anyway and just reinvent themselves. But I guess what I'm trying to work out is, because of all this publicity, will this, in a sense, keep a lid on the demand, the excessive demand for apartments, and in a sense, contain the house price rebound in Sydney and Melbourne?
So, first of all, just purely for brand new stock, then yes, it potentially will, but there's not much of a market there anyway because the foreigners still can't invest in Australia because they're struggling to get the lending and there's higher taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
So again, all of these things, they come and go.
But is there oversupply then of those sorts of apartments in Sydney and Melbourne?
Oh, there is at the moment, but if you then look 10, 20, 30 years at some of the plans, especially in, say, the western suburbs of Sydney with the new airports, then if no one's building now, there'll be a massive undersupply. So again, it's like anything with the markets, it goes up and down and up and down.
Okay, so we've talked about the overall big issues in the market. This rebound, are you surprised how quickly it's come back?
And I love the word rebound. I don't think the press have used that. It's always correction and the rest of it. And I don't believe the word correction because sure, a lot of economists that sell shares say that the property market's overinflated, but if you literally take all the money out of the market, in any market, even if you're in fruit and veg, no one's going to be buying because they've got no money. So sure, prices will come off. I reckon some of the brand new stuff was off 20 or 30%. The good stuff was off 5%, and some stuff was still rising. So it's definitely a different kind of market. But look, it all happened on the same day, literally. So it's the day after the election, and I actually voted for the first time in my life. So I think I was one of the votes that helped. But then we had the interest rate cut. We had the announcement about first home buyers, like a deposit kind of assistance. And I think there was one other thing. So we had 4 or 5 things.
The tax cut was it?
As
well. And so you
5 things in 1 week. It's the
and
happiest
also
week.
there was the lack of the threat that Bill Shorten presented, namely changes to negative gearing and the capital gains discount. So all that.
And I still didn't believe in that.
You left one thing out. Banks also were permitted to lend more.
Yeah. So it's all of those things. But the logic says, even with stuff like the tax cuts, was it's going to be grandfathered, so buy in now. But just like we had on Sky and the GFC, we were telling buyers to go and buy now because there's no other buyers in the market. There's lots of supply to go, but people don't think logically. They've got the herd mentality. So it's still going to take a while for them to get in. So people still need to get pre-approved, but confidence is the biggest motivator in the market beyond all the money side of things. People can find the money if they really want it. And so I think this confidence will continue. Most of the media is all positive. We've still got a few of the economists coming saying it's going to drop another 40%, but I think, after a while people just say, oh, whatever. So I think it's really how people wake up on the 1st of January. I think that's going to be the big teller.
Well, the important point to me is that a recession could make house prices fall again. We don't know at what rate. You've worked through at least... Were you here in 1990, 91 when the recession was on?
No, so I was in the UK. So I bought my first property in 92, just after we had all the negative gearing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right, so, but obviously you've analysed Australian markets because you're a buyer for your clients. If we had a reasonably serious recession, and it may well be coming out of a China-US trade deal created recession, what would you be saying to your clients about the possibilities of what the value of their properties might fall for in a recession?
Sure. So the main thing is buying quality stock, which would be the same in the stock market.
Yep.
So they've only got quality stock, and it was all bought on a conservative valuation.
Yep.
So they know you've got the right thing and the right price, and that's assuming they bought today. Most of them have bought 5 or 10 years ago, so they've already got the equity gains in there. So if we go into a recession, chances are interest rates are going to be even lower. Now is probably the most positive cash flow most people have been. So when I bought in the 90s, we were getting 5% yields, so 500 grand for a $500 a week apartment, but we were paying probably 8% interest rate, so you're dropping 3% gross. Now we're borrowing at 3.5%, we're getting 3.5% rents, so we're dropping 0% gross and maybe 1.5% net. So this is the most positive cash flow time. So unless rents suddenly go from 3.5 to 2, which I very much doubt, the cash flow difference isn't that much. So as long as you're not forced to sell and you can cash flow that property and you can wait 3, 5, 10 years.
Well, when I buy quality shares, I look from the point of view, even if there is going to be a recession, Woolworths will still keep pumping out lots of product to the people who turn up and have to eat every week, and therefore its dividend might fall only a little bit because they're not going to be investing in other things, they'll be paying dividends. And I figure from your point of view, the calibre of your tenant becomes an important part of the profit equation. You get a tenant who could be working in the mining industry, could be good one day but gone the next. Do you actually look at the calibre and the employability of a tenant?
Well, that's exactly why we buy in those areas. So again, I'll bring Bondi Beach just because everyone knows where it is around the world, is they're not in those specific industries and they're 25 to 35. They're always going to have a job. It's us old farts that will be out of work, not the young kids.
Yeah.
And if they can't afford to pay the rent, they'll go out 5 nights a week rather than 7, or 3 nights a week versus 7.
Yeah.
So these are people with high disposable incomes. They're sharing flats with a similar kind of people. They've got wealthy parents. They've got cash, which is why we follow them. Whereas that single person, say in Paddington, who's got a partner and 2 kids at private school and expensive BMWs, they're in a property that's worth 2 or 3 million on one income, earning $500,000, and they could lose their job.
Yeah.
So we go for the 25-year-olds earning, say, 75 to 125 grand each.
Yeah.
They're a pretty safe bet.
And I guess you, in a sense, you can actually grow with them as well. But I guess if they become owners of places in Paddington with the BMW, the kids, school fees and one income, they no longer can work with you anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, one last thing, and this is guesswork. Do you think that the worst of the house price problems Australia suffered over the last 2 years or so is behind us?
I think most of it is, yes. So I had a conversation with you maybe a year ago. I pulled all of my redraw out of my accounts and I was borrowing it at 5% and I was reinvesting at 2 or 2.5% because I was worried about the banks collapsing or pulling the rug out. I'm now putting that money back off term deposit back into my mortgages because I think the banks are pretty safe and I think they're pretty calm. It's not as if we're looking at 10 or 20% growth again. We're talking a few digits.
Yep.
So now is safe and calm, in my opinion.
Okay. Your website?
Yourempire.com.au.
That's Chris Gray. giving us his insights on the property market, and I think he knows a thing or two about it. Welcome back. Well, our continuous search for can we believe in this recovery of the housing market? I'm talking to Greville Pabst from WBP in Melbourne. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks, Peter.
So what's your position, WBP?
Well, WBP is a national property valuation group. We're the fourth largest supplier of property valuations in the country, predominantly to the major banks.
Yeah, now, historically, this has been, I guess, my own personal experience whenever banks have had to value my properties when we're looking for a loan or whatever. I often find valuers get excited on the high side and get very negative on the downside. Is this the nature of the industry, or am I just wrong in my observation?
Well, look, I think that, we're valuers are a good barometer of the market. I mean, they read the newspapers and listen to the news like everybody else. So, it's not an exact science. When you're assessing a value of a property, there's always a margin to it. And, the vendor always wants a higher price, and everyone thinks their house is worth often more than what it is. But simply the valuer must assess the value of the property based on what has occurred in the past in terms of sales evidence.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we saw the collapse of house prices. Well, the assumed collapse of house prices in Sydney and Melbourne. I think Melbourne was down about 10%, 9%, and Sydney was at 15%. But in the depths of those house price falls, does a valuer ultimately have to try and work out how severe the ongoing fall will be when they put a valuation to their customer, namely the bank?
Yeah, look, assessing value is quite difficult when you've got prices tumbling. And the most difficult thing is that you're relying on, there's a critical period where the valuers are relying on sales that have occurred at a much higher level, and then trying to interpret, well, hang on, that's not the market anymore. We've fallen off a cliff, and almost overnight prices fell, 10 to 15% in some or higher in some areas. So it was a very difficult period. But look, fortunately, we have stabilised, we have recovered, and we're now on an upward journey.
What does history tell you about the bottoming process when house prices fall? And what are you guessing is going to happen in Sydney and Melbourne over spring and then rolling into the autumn sales period?
Okay, so my learnings to date are that we've got clearance rates in both Melbourne and Sydney above 75%. Now, the reason for that is that we have an acute shortage of stock. Transactions are down approximately 25% on the previous year. Now, when I say we have an acute shortage, that shortage is of family-friendly homes. And that's what people want to buy is family homes. That's what's driving prices up. What's going to happen in spring? Well, I don't think spring's going to be a lot different, because I can't see in my talkings with agents every day that they're not seeing a whole bunch of stock coming on. It's going to be quite lean, which is going to, I think, have the effect of higher prices throughout spring. Yeah. So it's a very interesting market. We have stimulus by lower interest rates, and the banks APRA reducing making it easier for some borrowers to get a loan. And there's more stimulus, of course, coming, Peter, in January with the 5% deposit to encourage first home buyers. I think we need that. But the issue to address, and it hasn't been addressed, is the supply. How are we going to encourage developers to build more family-friendly homes? Because that's what the market needs right now. It doesn't need any more investment-grade cookie cutter apartments. It needs family friendly accommodation.
Okay, so the supply of apartments, ones that, as you inferred, would be more the target of investors, is there an oversupply of those in Sydney and Melbourne? And secondly, the fears around cladding and bad business building inspections, is that turning off some buyers who might be apartment buyers?
Yeah, look, the cladding issue has really, and the publicity around that, and there's been a number of buildings that we know in Melbourne, and the Neo building, the Lacrosse building in Melbourne, and in Sydney there's been other examples. So that has affected confidence, and buyers are very shy right now on apartments. And of course, the overseas buyers are also, they're out of the market in many respects. They're not buying like they were. And so, yes, there are sections of our markets in Melbourne and Sydney that are oversupplied. The big thing that changed that I'm seeing, and also in Sydney, is that the density of apartments is now moving out of the docklands and the South Banks and the CBDs of those cities, and they're moving out to our suburbs. And now I'm seeing oversupply in middle ring suburbs in both Melbourne and Sydney. That's something that's a new thing. That's something that we've seen before. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with that market.
So if you had to be forced to give your property outlook for 2019 and rolling into 2020, how would you call it?
Well, property is about confidence. And even though we have some stimulus by lower rates and reductions in the APRA requirements, making it easy to borrow money, there's still a reluctance. There's still a nervousness I feel in the market, which is why we're not seeing, despite we're seeing those results, and we'll continue to see the growth in our prices. Vendors still aren't coming out and putting their property on the market. So that suggests to me that they're worried about the global environment. They're worried about China, and they're worried about what's going to happen. Are we going into recession? They're worried about all those things. And so they're deciding to stay put. And there were some statistics that came out the other day that showed that the length of period that people are staying in their homes has now extended to 8 or 9 years. Now, that's because our kids are staying home longer. They can't afford to get into homes. That's because they're fearful that vendors, if they do sell, they're worried that they may not find another house to buy in.
Yeah.
And it's also, they're saying, well, why don't we just renovate and stay rather than the high transactional costs that they have when buying or selling. So I think we're going to see markets improve. And I think we're going to see further capital growth. And look, I think some commentators are saying double-digit growth. Well, we grew 1.3% house prices in August alone. So conservatively, I think 5 to 8% we're going to see growth.
Let's get personal here, because a lot of my viewers want to know where they should buy. You're in the valuation business. Are there some suburbs or towns where you think it looks like they're on an upward trend?
Look, I think affordability drives many of those decisions. But one thing I do know is that the biggest hit came, and the biggest falls came in the inner areas of Sydney and in Melbourne. Those areas fell in Melbourne and in Sydney, 15, in some cases 20% in our inner ring suburbs. Yeah. Now, they had the biggest falls. In my view, that's where the recovery is going to begin. So the best opportunities are going to be in the inner areas. Now, having said that, I think structurally, first home buyers, where there's been a change is where government infrastructure is moving, and the government is really wanting to invest in regional towns. I'm seeing that in Geelong with the fast train, with the government supporting new offices and commercial development in some of these regions. Bendigo's another $600 million extension to the Bendigo Hospital. the same in Ballarat. So those regional towns, I think, where the median house price is still under 600,000, where you're getting those stamp duty concessions, particularly in Victoria, they're where I see the opportunity. So the inner city areas of Melbourne and Sydney, and in regional areas of both some regional areas of Victoria and New South Wales.
Okay, what are the common mistakes that people make when they're buying property?
Look, the common mistake is that the median house price in Melbourne of 700 odd thousand, and in Sydney it must be over $800,000 now. That people simply don't get advice before they buy. You'll go and buy a car and you'll get your mate who might be a mechanic to check it out. You buy shares and you get advice. When we buy property, we simply don't get independent advice, and too often we rely upon the advice of the agent, who is of course taking a commission off the vendor.
Yeah. Okay, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Peter.
That's Greville Paps from WBP. Peter, thanks for joining us on the show.
Terrific.
Now, we've all watched you for a long time. How long have you been doing Grand Designs Australia?
This is my 10th year. Eighth,
I believe that.
8th series is on air as we speak. So we're making seasons 9 and 10 also at the moment. Yeah. So 10 years in the making, and we're making 100th episode at the moment. So.
And they said you'd never last.
Well, I don't think they knew, because I was untested.
Yeah.
When they took me on, I was a bit of a gamble.
Did you find it hard in the early days?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was really nervous.
Yeah.
My wife says it doesn't show, but I know there's this volcano stewing inside me when I look back at the early episodes. Yeah. I'm like a cat on a hot tin roof. Yeah. But these days I have a healthy disrespect for worrying about the camera. I just don't even look at it. So
which you did very well then. But also, when you started the show, you had to compare yourself to Kevin McLeod, who's like a Shakespearean actor, isn't he?
He did acting.
Yeah, it shows he's brilliant.
Yeah, and I don't have that background.
No.
I have no.
Neither do I. I act as well as you do.
So no, Kevin has been a great mentor, and we get on really well whenever I'm over there.
Does he own the franchise?
No.
Fremantle Media owns it.
Well, Fremantle Media bought the rights to show it out here. Okay. Foxtel commissioned it. Yeah. So Fremantle is not from Perth. Fremantle's a big company. Yeah. It's based in London, England. Yeah. So he doesn't own the
so he's just
franchise.
He's
like me, but we get on really well, and I don't compare myself to him. He's doesn't interfere with what I do here, and although we're good friends, as I say, we run our own show, and it's completely unscripted. So
and what I love, I can just feel the competitive juices in Peter Madison, because you are an architect doing a grand, and that must always make you feel a little bit, well, I know you're not like that, but you are an architect doing an architect type show.
Yep, and some of the houses I really admire and aspire to, and think, why didn't I come up with that? Yeah. The other episodes where I remain steely quiet because I'm not sure whether I agree with it. Yeah. So we do all manner of styles.
You find that hard, because architects, all the architect mates I have, they can't help but give me their opinions, particularly when it comes to buildings.
Well, I think it goes with the territory, and I'm not a nosy or pushy sort of person. I don't think. No. So I don't impose my views on the homeowners that I follow, nor my clients in my architectural practice. Yeah. I listen to what the brief is, and I try and come up with a solution that suits them. And likewise with the shows that and episodes I make on television, it's about their journey. It's not about me, or my opinion.
Yeah. Well, apart from wanting to get to know the real Peter Madison on the show, I have to tell you, just before this interview, we had one of our financial planning clients in, and he said, well, I've just bought a new home and I'm going to do a renovation. And we said, because we're financial planners, we said, well, how much do you plan to spend? He said, about 200,000. I said, well, I'm just going to be interviewing Peter Madison, who would probably laugh at you and say, no, it will be more.
So my advice for you as a financial planner to give to your client, who you're advising, is if he's fixed on that sum of money, he needs to have, like financial planning, he needs cost planning during the design phase, not at the end when the design's finished. During the design phase, he needs to get a quantity surveyor to cost it for him,
Yep.
so he knows what he's going to be in for. Too late once all the drawings are done.
Yeah.
Too late when it's gone to tender. He needs that early advice on cost control.
But how many people do that?
Every one of my clients.
Yeah, you're gonna. But you know, you've met lots of people on TV.
Yeah.
None of them seem
No,
to do
because
that.
they think it's like buying a car off the showroom floor.
Yeah.
So what if I can see a car and it's $45,000? Why can't I get a house the same and design it from scratch and make a prototype that's never been done before?
Yeah.
It's like making a car that's never been done before. It's always going to cost a bit more.
And so, in watching your shows, I've done it for, as you remind me, 10 years. It seems to me that the end result, we tend to see a really nice place at the end, but they have to pay a lot of money to make it look good in the end, even if we ignore the eyebrow raises on the structural things that you don't think are particularly right. Is this a typical thing of most people who renovate, do you think?
Most people renovate. Renovation is more difficult than new housing.
Yeah.
So there's more unknowns,
Yeah.
more uncertainty. So we need to allow more money up front for unknowns.
Yeah,
So
good
I'd
point.
be saying new house allow 4 or 5% on top of the quote, top of your builder's quote. Renovations, I'd be saying allow 7-10% on top of the quote for unknowns. So that a lot of them don't get finished because they haven't got the money at the very end. So you need cost planning and the contingency sum to bring particularly renovations home.
Okay. Let me ask you a hard question. It seems to me sometimes, and I think I can remember it was an Adelaide couple where they kind of had a friend who was an architect.
Oh, I know the episode. I know the episode.
And
Devastating.
Yeah.
So
I wasn't sure whether it was their fault or the architect's fault.
Why would you go into the most expensive contract of your life with a friendly handshake because you think he's a nice guy?
And the builder also was like on the
The
side
builder
as well.
was an a-hole.
Yeah.
Just between you
Oh,
and
we
I.
could see that. We could see that.
Disaster.
But he didn't have a contract either, did he? He was doing it when he said, well, I've got some spare time.
It's just a bit naive.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you've got an architect and a builder, you think everything's going to go sweet.
Yeah.
But, you know, you need to do a little bit of due diligence on the biggest transaction of your life, possibly.
Do you think, apart from providing entertainment, which you've done in spades, that deep down you're actually teaching a lot of people who might be building a home what can go wrong?
Oh, I think it's a rich area, a bit like finance. You're not taught at.
No.
Sorry, you're not taught at school.
No.
Not taught about what money means.
Yeah.
And likewise with housing, architecture, design, it goes through the keeper. And we're all involved with it. You've got a house and there'll be things going wrong with the house and you're not sure where to go or how to fix it. And you don't understand, I'm not saying you personally, but a lot of people don't understand structure, don't understand rainwater. They don't understand what's behind a wall. When you look at a wall, it's just paint.
Yeah.
There's of course a lot behind a wall. So it's an area that's rich in information and we all need to know a little bit about it. So it should become a standard subject for schools.
Okay. Has your business benefited from you being a TV star?
Do you know what a donut looks like?
Yes.
That's a big zero. Not at all.
Really?
In 10 years, I've had maybe one phone call from a woman that wanted to replace the vinyl in her kitchen. I've had no knock on from the show at all. There's no... people see me as someone on camera, possibly not as an architect, but my core business is architecture.
And it's in South Melbourne?
South Melbourne,
Yeah.
Which is bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we
Well, we'll change that. All the people who watch this in Melbourne now will realise that you're the architect they go to.
How far what's the reach of this show?
Well, it'll be huge. It'll be huge.
Excellent.
Okay, we'll make it happen. So, what else do you do? Like, how many hours of a week do you spend as an architect and the rest in TV?
My headspace is full time in my practice.
Yep.
And I have got a commitment to make the show, and it takes me out of my practice some days of the week, but I'll quarantine the start of the week always for my business. So I've managed to make it work, and I do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun, and I think it helps my practice. I see the work we do, as I can see what's going on around the country, what's working, what's not working in the design scene. Yeah. So I think I'm very proud of the work we do at my office, and I think that it's been helpful to be able to see all the couples and all the buildings go up around Australia that I have.
the period where house prices were falling in Sydney and Melbourne, did it have any impact?
1989 to 93, is that the period you're talking about?
No, the most recent one.
Right, the most recent one, in the last
Well, you weren't
year.
working on TV then, were you?
No, I wasn't, but I was involved with it.
Yeah.
That's another story.
Yeah, well, but like think about Grand Designs in UK, they went right through the GFC, and a lot of people who borrowed large amounts of money for great properties really were, and a lot of the banks were causing problems. Did you see any of that in those 2 years, as basically the last 2 years, where people who had a grand design and they had the problems with their costings and had to go to the bank, that they had a bank problem to finish it off?
A couple, yes.
Yeah, I would have thought
so. And some of those are still not finished. Yeah. They're still recovering. So we're doing one house in Sydney, actually. A fellow got caught up with that, and he's been building for about 5 years. Had trouble getting finance to finish it, and so it's still unfinished. They're living in a half-renovated house, which is pretty sad, really, because you've got. It's very uncomfortable living in a half-finished house. Nothing quite works properly. Yeah. So in the number of episodes we take on, we always take on a contingency. Yeah. Like we need in everything we do in our life. So we take on more episodes than actually are going to be finished because things like the financial problems over the last few years, a slow house.
Real life gets in the way.
Real life is a great plan.
Now I have to ask this question because a lot of people have put this to me, that some people come on your show to actually build a showpiece property which they then sell.
It's happened.
It's happened?
Yep. Yeah. And some of them do well, some of them the wheels fall off. I think it's a unfortunate motivation to be on the show. I mean, the houses that really sing, the stories that really sing are people who are doing it because they're immersed in the joy of creating they're really grounded in trying to create something which is has a long-term vision about it. So I'm thinking of one particular episode which is up at Byron Bay, at Watergoes, and a couple did a house there, told us that it was a lifelong journey, and a week after we wrapped, it was on the market, and he actually lost a lot of money. He'd hoped that he'd make a fortune by being on the show. So it's an unfortunate motivation, but people do what they do, and so, but it's not common. Most people want to share a heartfelt story.
Okay. One last question, mate. There'll be the second question. Michael, how have you changed as a human being, going from the world of architecture, which is a very arty / building, like architecture, you see art people having to hang around builders and you have to learn from it. Yeah. But how have you as a person changed becoming a television personality?
Not much. I think I'm still the person I was. You develop a different skill set, like changing a job. Like anyone changes a job, there's different challenges. Perhaps a bigger step than changing a job. I've become a lot more confident as a person because I have to be, and I do a lot more writing, and I think I'm do a lot of presenting, hosting, much like you're doing today, and so that's been I'm very, very lucky to be put into the position where I can develop these skills and be able to impart information in a way that I think is digestible to a very large audience. And that's a really honoured place to be, isn't it?
Without doubt. One last question is there any good question I should have asked you?
I thought it was all going to be about finance.
Oh, no way.
You haven't grilled me at all, mate.
No, I'm not going to embarrass you. You're an architect. You know, you're cyclical. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's really hard.
It's a lumpy profession. Yeah. Any questions? Look,
the value of an architect.
No, the value of an architect is undoubtedly critically important. Society won't move forward if we don't challenge the past. And the environments that we live in and inhabit, whether it be for home or work, is the places we create. We're all creative. You're creative in what you do. I think I am in what I do. And the environment we work in needs to be able to develop that. So it's a very important area. But finance is also something which is really important. And I'm always thinking I should know more about it than I do. It's an area that it's the lifeblood of what we do. Yeah. And I like to think of it as money and is the transference of energy. in the role of grand designs, I get rewarded not only because I'm doing a good thing, but I get a salary from the commissioning station that's put the show on.
Yeah.
And that transfer of energy is really important. And I like to think that I can, because of that reward, I can then transfer that energy to other people.
Yeah, and in many ways, even though it is an artistic creation, these new buildings, we invariably work out what it's worth, how much they put into it, what is that place worth, and we put those sort of valuations. It's not the only valuation, but it's a relevant one.
And a question you could ask is, will design make any difference to money and value? I mean, does design result in is it a good financial investment? You could ask me that question.
Yeah, okay. Well, what is it?
Well, design is something which is tangible and intangible. It's transferring joy and wellness is a tangible thing, and you can't put a value on that. But architecture has a huge bearing on that aspect of life. So I think it has a huge value.
Okay.
To answer your question.
Okay, and one comment I have to make about Peter Madison to my audience: he's as good a bloke as you think he is. Peter, nice to have you.
I'll have to believe him.